Good afternoon. It's November 24th, 2024, and it is the Feast of Christ the King. And this weekend, we're invited to reflect upon our understanding of king and kingship. What does that really mean to us? And most of us probably have an understanding of king based on our society, based on our culture, based on if we read history. And when we read history, one of the things we discover is there were a lot of really bad kings. There were some kings who started off good and ended up bad. There's some that started off bad and ended up good. But overall, most kings fall into the trap of power and glory. They seem to think that they are the all-powerful. And to a certain extent, we kind of allow them to do that. But it's not the image that Christ presents to us. For Christ, kingship is about willingness to die for your people. And that's what Jesus did. And in the scriptures, we hear that Jesus said, "This is what I came for. My kingdom's not of this world, but I came for this." And what did he come for? Our salvation. And to get that, he suffered and died so that you and I might have eternal life. That's his understanding of kingship. That's the kingship that he lived out for us. At the same time, kingship is something that we're supposed to understand from our baptismal promise. For in baptism, we are priest, prophet, and king. Our priestly duty is to offer sacrifice, to give praise and worship to God, to come together as a community and worship God as a community. Why? Because that was Christ's invitation. It's kind of like Jesus invites us every Sunday to gather at his table. But do we? And more often than not, a lot of people choose not to come to the table, which is a little distressing, especially as we're approaching the Advent and Christmas season. My mom's greatest distress was when part of the family didn't show up at Christmas time. There was the empty chair at the table. The family wasn't all together. You might want to reflect on that in your relationship with God, in that, do you leave your spot at the table empty? Or is your spot at the table filled? But there's our priestly duty, to give praise and worship to God, to celebrate within the context of community. And one of the neat things is when your neighbors see you driving off to church, or they see you involved in charitable works or involved at the church, the prophetic comes into play. You haven't said anything, it's just your actions often speak way louder than any word will ever do. But our kingly duty, and that's the one that sometimes we miss. Jesus said, "Love God above all things, love your neighbor as yourself." What's our kingly duty? Well, if Jesus is willing to suffer and die for us so that we have salvation, what are we willing to do for one another? Are we willing to die for one another? To what extent are we willing to go for the other person? And where is the dignity of the person found within that? You see, in the kingly role, everybody's equal. It's kind of like the person who says, "Yes, I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ." And we're all supposed to have one. All of us are supposed to have one. As Catholics, every time we go forward and we receive the Eucharist, we reaffirm that very unique, intimate relationship with Christ. But we sometimes forget that Christ doesn't have a personal relationship with us. Christ's relationship with us is based on community. It's a communal relationship. Jesus didn't come so some of us get saved. Jesus didn't come so that a few of us get saved. Jesus came so that all might be saved. Doesn't want to lose any that the Father has given him. And the Father gave them all. And so he's willing to suffer and die for all of us. So what are we willing to do in return? Do I respect the dignity of everyone? Do I seek Christ in the other person? Jesus said, "Love God above all things, love your neighbor as yourself." Am I loving my neighbor? Am I truly loving my neighbor? Or do I put restrictions on it? You know, I like these people, but I don't like those people. I love those people, but I don't love those people. No. That's not part of our Christian tradition. That's not a part of who we are as Catholics. We're supposed to love everybody because they're all God's children. That's our kingly duty. That's part of our baptism, to seek Christ in the other. When we leave Mass, every time we leave Mass, we are sent out into the world to take Christ to the world. Are we taking him to the world? Are we being Christ to one another? Are we seeking Christ in the other? That's our kingly duty. And Jesus set us an example so that we might do what he did. He died for us. The calling that we have as a kingly people is, are we prepared to die for one another? Do we hold the dignity and the value of every one of God's children as an utmost? See, Jesus' love for us is unconditional. We sometimes forget that. It doesn't matter how sinful we are, God still loves us. He may not approve of our choices. He may not like our choices. He may not love our choices. But the person is always loved. Can we do that with one another? See, it's interesting. Parents, to what extent would you go for your children? And for children, where and how far are you willing to go for your parents? For our siblings, for our friends, for acquaintances? What are you willing to do for the other? Jesus sets an example. It's not a kingship that we know. It's not a kingship that we understand. It's totally radical and totally different. But even within the kingship of Charles, the King of England, who is our king because we're part of the Commonwealth, his calling's not the same. And I'm pretty sure that if you went up to Charles and said, "Are you going to die for your people?" I wonder what his answer might be. Then again, what's your answer? Are you prepared to die for God's people? Because Jesus did it for us. He laid down his life and he died for you and me so that we might have eternal life. And so he sets us an example. And he invites us to strive to reach that too. You and I are on a journey. The journey's not over. Challenge is, how do we improve? How do we get better on this journey? How do we deepen our personal relationship with Christ? And part of that is our relationships with one another. May God continue to watch over you, bless you, guard you all the days of your life. It is November 24th, 2024. It is the Feast of Christ the King. God bless.